Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, last week we talked about child support and pulled up the calculator, and today we're going to continue that conversation and talk about add-ons, because this is something that can be a little bit confusing to people, and so we are going to explain everything today. I'm here with Bobby. Bobby, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here and talk about this extra stuff, because as we talked about a little bit last week and I think talked about before we filmed the episode, these add-ons can sometimes be the bulk of it. You know, if you have a 50-50 schedule or you have equal incomes and maybe not a lot of child support, you know, extracurriculars aren't nothing, as we know.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about what a few of the add-ons are. So it could be, health insurance or medical bills that are not covered with health insurance. It can be daycare or childcare, extracurricular activities, school expenses. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about that don't necessarily go under the blanket of general, child support. So Bobby, why don't you kind of start for us, kind of give us the legal framing of these add-ons and sort of like some things that people need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a refresher, in Illinois, we use an income shares model to calculate child support, which means that we take your income, the other parent's income, we add them together, we put them into a calculator, we add also the number of overnights that each of you are getting, and that spits out a base child support number. That child support, explicitly what it says in the statute, does not include extracurricular activities, health insurance premiums, out-of-pocket medical expenses, childcare expenses, and school expenses. So like private school tuition, that sort of thing. None of that is supposed to be included in child support. So we got to figure out what we're doing with all that stuff on top of it.
So we talked about several different examples last time, Bobby, of, things that are like a 50-50 split and what child support looks like with that. Or maybe someone who has, makes significantly a larger income than the other. And so there's kind of like a different split with that. When it comes to these add-ons like medical expenses and childcare and school expenses, extracurriculars, are the percentages typically the same, or does it vary? Is it vary depending on the situation?
Yeah. So when we're talking, it depends on which area we're talking about. When we're talking about health insurance, and we'll start there to show an example. Health insurance is one that you just plug right into the calculator, and it gives you basically a pro rata amount for each party. So if you are making twice as much as the other party, you're going to pay something close to twice as much. But honestly, the formula is not like some hidden thing, but judges, attorneys, all just go to the calculator to look at the formula. So rather than kind of guessing here, we can just dive in and look directly at the numbers. But I think before we do that, let's just talk about a couple things to understand about health insurance. One, health insurance coverage is mandatory. It has to be addressed during the divorce or child support. If you're not married, you're just doing child support. It has to be addressed during this process. So either the child's going to be covered by you, by the other parent. If neither of you have health insurance, if health insurance is prohibitively expensive, then the judge might order one or both of you to apply for public aid and get the child covered. In Illinois, it's called all kids. If you fall below a certain income threshold, you can get your kids on public insurance. The premiums are going to be added, like we said before, on top of child support, and they're going to be prorated. There's going to be uninsured, there's going to be expenses beyond health insurance. I mean, don't get me started. We could do an entire episode just ranting about health insurance. And I think this is a common thing. Everybody feels like health insurance doesn't quite work in this country because you never know where what's going to be covered. Even when you have insurance, you go into the doctor and there's like lots of surprises when you get a bill. You thought something's covered, it's actually not. Though all of those out-of-pocket medical expenses, they need to be divided by the parties. So that needs to be addressed. And then if one party is supposed to cover under health insurance the children and they don't, then you can go back into court. You can get that enforced. Sometimes you can get it added into the child support, so it's coming directly off of their paycheck or something like that. As we'll see in the calculator, it's usually treated as an offset towards child support anyway. So it's rare that you have to go back and get it enforced that way. But let's dive in here and take a look at what the calculator really does for.
Yeah, I'd love to see those numbers. So why don't we, kind of walk us through what that's going to look like, and as far as the healthcare, and getting your health insurance.
Absolutely. And we'll start with some of the same type of numbers we used last week. So It was $5,000 that the custodial parent is going to be making, $12,000 per month that the non-custodial parent is making. We're going to skip down this section. We'll talk about maintenance most likely on the next episode and how that affects the child support amount. We'll talk about what's called the multifamily adjustment. That's if you have kids outside of this relationship that is at issue right now. We'll address that on another episode. But right here, this is the child support section. So what we need to do is say, okay, let's say that you come to an agreement with your spouse. Oh, that just refreshed. Not sure why, but let me just go real quick through here. Let's say that for this example, the custodial parent is the one that has the health insurance. So they have the health insurance, custodial parent we're selecting. And then the amount. This can get a little bit tricky because, for example, let's say the custodial parent works as a teacher. They have great insurance. They get all of their kids covered. And on their paycheck, it says, there's some sort of, let's say $800 comes out of their paycheck per month for health insurance. Now, here it's asking how many people are covered. So in this example, we're going to put 4 people are covered because it's the custodial parent and the 3 kids.
Right, 3 kids.
Under this, the way that this calculator does it is I believe it's just going to take the 800 and divide it by 4, so that it's going to say, okay, it's $200 per kid.
Per person. Okay.
Yeah. Per person. And then I believe it'll calculate automatically that it's $200. So that's $200 per kid. So it's actually $600 is the health insurance allotment. But we'll see when we hit calculate. If it does put $800 in here for the total, then we can adjust it. The other thing that the lawyers may fight about here is the non-custodial parent's lawyer might say, well, wait a minute, how much would that health insurance cost if there was only 2 kids or if there's only 1? Like, what is the actual amount of the premium? And it could be a policy that there is no, like, maybe her employer doesn't charge per dependent. Sometimes you can get all the kids covered for nothing extra, or all the kids are covered for like $50 extra or something like that. So the attorney may say, wait a minute, we want to take a closer look at how this policy actually works and what is the actual cost for these additional kids. So this is kind of the rough way that we do it to start. And then if we want to look closer at it, the attorneys can dive in and kind of find the nuance in the numbers. As it stands here, the calculator is saying, okay, the child support obligation is going to be $2,200, and then the health insurance obligation on top is going to be $408.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that is going to be in addition. So the non-custodial parent who's making that $12,000 a month is going to have to pay close to $2,650 per month as their obligation for child support and health insurance. And we haven't
Wow.
yeah, it's a lot. And we haven't even
It
got
is a lot.
to childcare or extracurricular expenses or anything like that.
Whew. What about while we're on healthcare in this situation, and maybe it varies, but we're talking about that's the coverage. But let's say you go to the doctor, or someone breaks their arm or something, or they have an emergency room visit,
Yeah.
and there's a bill for like $1,000 or something. How do you know, or is it decided in this agreement, how much and who pays that $1,000, or how is it divvied up?
Great question. And the answer is going to be it's going to be negotiated between the parties, or a judge is going to have to decide. And a judge could decide in this situation that they are going to divvy it up based on the income amounts. So maybe in this situation, non-custodial parent's going to be paying 2/3 of it, or the
Mhm.
judge could say, if I'm representing the non-custodial parent, I'm going to say, listen, judge, 2/3 isn't fair. They're already paying $2,600 to the other side. Their incomes are almost equal at this point. It should just be
Exactly.
a 50-50 split for those uncovered expenses.
Right.
So
Right. Okay, so that's definitely something that you want to think about and negotiate during your divorce process, because that is going to come up over the life of your children.
absolutely. There is no doubt going to be uncovered things. Braces is often one you see, or dental work, where can be thousands of dollars and it's not covered by insurance, or, God forbid, there is something more serious that happens with a child and they have to go in the hospital and you end up with medical bills in the 4 or 5 figures. We
Mm,
we need to be The last thing you want to do is have to deal with medical bills, and then because you didn't deal with it in your divorce, you're now dealing with attorney's fees to deal with medical bills. And what always happens with that is it it feels like a waste of money. It feels like you're throwing good money after bad, because attorney's fees are minimum 4 figures. So it doesn't make sense to be paying attorneys 4 figures to fight over medical bills that are, 4 figures or even low 5 figures. At that point, kind of everybody's losing. And
mhm.
usually, if I'm doing a consultation and at the end of it, it's like, okay, how much is this going to cost? The answer is, well, we're going to need a retainer of $5,000. You're better off, honestly, just paying that towards the medical bills. Now,
Sure.
again, that's not going to solve the problem if it comes up again. So you might say, you know what, we need to get this addressed because we have 10 more years of this. So we got to deal with it now. Deal with it during your divorce so you don't have to double dip, don't have to pay an attorney again.
For sure.
Let
If at all possible.
If at all possible. Let's take a look just real quickly to see how this plays out
Yeah.
if the other side has the insurance. So
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
if the other side has the insurance, as we can see, their child support goes down by about 200. So as we can
Right.
see, there is a proration here, because again, if the parent who is making 5,000 has the insurance, they're
Mhm.
getting a credit of about 400. Whereas,
So, yeah, so maybe if both parents have insurance, it might be worth kind of running the numbers both ways. Because it may be that, like, the one making a little bit less, maybe they're thankful for not having to, cover the health insurance, and maybe that's, then the other side isn't having to pay as much. So maybe it can be a win-win for everybody.
yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense to look at what are the insurances that both parties have, how much does it cost to add children, and kind of how does it level out depending on who's covering the kids. 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so why don't we move along to another add-on, childcare and daycare expenses, especially when the kids are young. That's a can be a pretty hefty expense. Could be that one person had typically stayed home, but now that they're getting divorced, they need to get a job, and to be able to work, typically you've got to have some childcare and at least until the kids are in school. And even when the kids are in school, sometimes that includes like an aftercare situation, that type of thing. So, why don't we kind of run through some things to think about when it comes to those kind of childcare, daycare expenses?
Yeah, absolutely. Childcare can be a real killer. It can be really expensive. When you get divorced, your expenses, the amount of expenses increases substantially based on how much income is coming into the dual households. So it becomes a much larger percentage of the total incomes across the parties. Usually there's a much greater need for childcare after the divorce. The people that I feel like get hit the hardest with this are people divorcing that don't have family in the area. Oftentimes our families are so crucial. My mother-in-law was just at the house taking care of our 3-year-old, in providing that extra support, that before care or that after care, to just fill in the gaps for when mom and dad can get home from work. So this one can be a pretty big deal, and can be an area that's very contentious, that people can fight over. Which daycare should we send the child to? Where geographically is this daycare? Do we want to send do you want send the kid to the cheap daycare? Not necessarily, but can we afford the one that's more expensive at this point? A lot of things to consider. And so how is daycare actually dealt with? Well, it's again a prorated amount. And as we can see on the calculator, and um we'll zero out health insurance just so we can see how this is affected
Sure.
without without the
Without
health
that
insurance
number.
included. But let's go back up here and take a look at what happens when we add these childcare expenses. I mean, childcare, depending on how you're using it, how many kids you have, be
Hmm.
easily be. I'd say 2,000 would be like the very small amount of.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you have 3 kids, like in this scenario, if you had 3 kids that weren't in, like, elementary school,
Right.
that could be a very hefty bill. Because I mean, I think, 1,200 is, 1,500, that's, pretty reasonable for even 1, and then I think sometimes you get a discount if you have multiple,
Yeah.
if you're talking about full-time daycare, Monday through Friday situation.
All right. So to take a look at the childcare expenses, we got to move into this other screen. And take a look at the detailed breakdown here. And again, it turns into a proration, but what we see here is that the non-custodial parent is contributing 1,360 towards that $2,000 child care amount.
Ooh.
So you add that to the 2,200 that they're paying, and then you add that to possibly another 400 they're paying. Right there, you're looking at potentially $4,000. It's a lot. Is that fair?
Wow.
Is that not fair? Like I said last episode, that's not my purview. That's not what I
Mm,
do as an attorney. Certainly we can make arguments to the judge, this is not reasonable. This is not, but saying something like this is not fair to a judge doesn't get you very far. So if you're in court, your attorney should be making arguments based on the law, and the law doesn't say fair anywhere.
right,
It it
right.
it, it talks about what is our prorated amount, and this is a guideline, so the judge can deviate from it. And your attorney can make arguments as to why this is unreasonable based on the guideline and the total incomes of both parties. Whether or not that gets you anywhere is a big TBD. So we're here to just kind of give you the raw facts and let you know this is a very real possibility that a judge could order this kind of amount.
Yeah, I mean, that 12,000 that the one parent originally had is just dwindling away, and then the other one's looking a little bit better, but man, it's just you look at it and you're like, "We need more money here."
It just becomes, I mean, I don't want to throw out kind of this really trite expression, and I've heard this expression said, and I won't dive into how I feel about it, but we've probably all heard it: cheaper to keep her. That's the expression, and this is where it comes from. Is it becomes very, very expensive when you split the households. And in this example, hey, it could be the 12,000. It could be cheaper to keep him. The person making the 12,000 could be the woman in the scenario.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, Bobby. I'm like, don't sell us short over here. Who did say that the woman was making 12K?
That's why I didn't even want to say the expression, because
I know.
But that's where it comes from, because if you think about it, this household was making $17,000 a month, and they didn't have to deal with child support. They didn't have to deal with as much childcare, most likely. And now they do. Now they have to support 2 mortgages, 2 rents, and do it on the same income, and then also be paying child support. So it's tough. It's tough.
It is. And I mean, you do have to, it kind of takes you back to just remembering that it sounds, I hate to say this, but a marriage, there are some levels of marriage that is kind of business-like, I mean, there's, and so you just, and you got to weigh your pros and cons of, every marriage is not going to work out, and that's okay. But there's some growing pains on the business side that you're going to have to figure out, but you will, it doesn't mean that you can't then on the other side say, hey, okay, this isn't working, so now I'm going to figure out a way to make more money or whatever.
Yeah.
People do all kinds of amazing things and make it work. But initially, before there are some shifts, there can be some sticker shock for sure. And we just want to educate you to know that it may be coming.
Yeah. And a big reason that some people stay together, I think there's some reality to that, is that they realize that financially it's going to be a lot harder to split. And maybe they kind of renegotiate what their arrangement is, and they figure out like, hey, we just need to stay together for the kids and to financially help ourselves. It's a better scenario to stay together. That might be better for you personally. Again, we're not here to cast judgment on anybody's decision, and deciding to divorce is such a huge personal decision. We're just here to try to educate you on what the implications could be if you do get divorced.
Yeah, this is just what it looks like. So just to be educated so you know. Okay, so the other thing that we've got to talk about is extracurriculars and school expenses. And I'll say from personal experience, when I got divorced, my son was very young, and I think we divorced, and a week or two later he turned 3. And so in our minds, what we thought extracurriculars and school expenses was going to be was not it at all, because you don't at that age really know, particularly maybe what your kids are into. And so those expenses grew to levels that we had no idea would happen. I had a friend when they got divorced, the ex-husband was just, bound and determined about, he had wanted to make these rules about the daughter with horseback riding. And so they went to these extensive, lengths that he just was, bound and determined to decide how they were going to do this horseback riding thing. Well, it cost them a ton of money. And then at the end of the day, a couple years after they divorced, she doesn't even ride horses anymore. She's a soccer player. So it didn't even matter because she was young. She was like 5 when
Yeah.
they got divorced.
The whims of a child. It's crazy.
I mean,
You
yeah, I mean, she didn't turn out to be the equestrian that, he thought she was gonna be at 5. So, these can be kinda tricky conversations
Yeah.
because you think you're going into it, with a certain knowledge, but you have to realize things can really change.
Yeah. I mean, if I was getting divorced right now and we were if we were basing our extracurricular expenses based on, what our son was into right now, we'd be like, oh, well, he's not going to be a sports kid, because he doesn't like to do any sports now. But who knows? In a year or two,
Right.
he could get obsessed with travel baseball or something like that. And then,
Right, or maybe he's not into sports, but, I know people where their kids are into band, and in high school, they literally go the whole summer and travel with their band across the country. I mean, it's not cheap to do that. I mean, there's
no.
lots of things. It's not even just sports. There's lots of things your kids could get into at a high competitive level. There's a big culture of that right now, and you just have no idea. I mean, when we were paying, $100 for him to play T-ball, now we pay $2,500 for him to play, 3 months of baseball. It's just it's a huge difference that you would have no idea was coming.
And you don't want to deprive your kids of that. And at the same
Oh, never.
time, you both, when you do get divorced, both parents need to be on the same page. And if they're not, then you start to get into these, fights or awkward situations where it's like, well, I want my kid to do this, but I don't want to be doling out the entire 2,500 myself. And
Sure.
you might decide that you're going to do it because that's just your sacrifice, or you might have to make a tough decision to say, we're going to do something else because that's just not in the cards. And so again, negotiating this stuff to a certain degree, based on what they're into at this point, yeah, you want to do it, but hopefully we can do it on a high enough level and with enough flexibility so that we're not spending all this time attorney's fees over horseback riding and then they're not into horses.
And then they don't even
Yeah.
get horses anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have advised in that situation. I might said, why don't we put in something for this year and
Mhm.
then leave some language in there that leaves it open or something, or see if she's going to be sticking with it. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, it's kinda crazy. But I mean, but I will say in my situation, I give it up to my, son's dad. I mean, he's awesome, and we split everything, and we kinda laugh because 'cause we're like, we had no idea it was gonna be this, but we've continued just to move along, but I think we both can acknowledge that we didn't know what we didn't know, at the time.
Absolutely. And I think this is great for people to hear, like, just because what your situation is now, if you have young kids, it can flip 180 degrees very easily. So
Which I think is another reason of, like, don't on certain things, don't, like, beat it into the ground so much because it could be a non-issue later.
yeah. And the law does, for much of this child support stuff and expense stuff, says substantial change in circumstances is a reason that you can go back to court. So,
Sure.
oftentimes the most contentious co-parenting moment between two people is during the divorce process. So I often tell people, let's get an agreement on paper. We don't need to get into the weeds as much as you think. We might be able to do that later if it's an issue, because ideally what we do with this settlement agreement is we sign it, we put it in a drawer, and then we just co-parent like human beings would, where we talk about things and we make agreements. This is like a contract between two business partners. Like,
Mhm.
if we're, opening a fast food restaurant together and we're business partners and we're signing this agreement together, if we're having to go to this agreement every week to figure out, oh, well, who's responsible for what, there's no way we can run a business together. Like,
Yeah.
that's not how you do things in a partnership. So ideally, this is a framework, but we're able to put it in a drawer and just work together.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a great point. Okay, so talk us through a little bit, some of like how would you attack extracurriculars and school expenses? What does that look like?
Yeah. So as far in most of these situations, or let's say kind of the best, most vanilla agreement that we're going to have is we're going to have joint decision making around extracurriculars. Extracurriculars is a specific area of decision making that we need to agree on. So we're ideally going to be agreeing that we're both making decisions here around their extracurriculars. The most common language, or the best language to use, is that consent is not going to be unreasonably withheld. So, we want to create an environment where both parties are agreeing to extracurriculars. But as far as like who pays what, again, we can do the prorated way where we're looking at the incomes. We might take a look at it and say, well, the person who's making the $12,000 is paying all this other stuff. So at this point, when we're talking about extracurriculars, it makes more sense to do 50-50.
Mhm.
And oftentimes what happens with extracurriculars is we do put a cap. So let's say $5,000 a year is our cap. That's the most that either side is going to pay. And then once we go beyond the cap, it's up to each parent as far as do they want to go beyond the cap and just pay that amount because they don't want to say no to their kid who's really passionate about whatever they're passionate about. So that's basically how we attack the extracurriculars. There is going to be a split of it, and there's usually going to be a cap. That's the most common area where there's a cap. You can't really cap out-of-pocket medical expenses because we don't have a choice there. But we can look at what are the more affordable options potentially with extracurriculars and say, okay, we're not going to do this league, but we're going to do that league. But these things are tricky because you don't, saying no to a 10-year-old who's like really wants to be with his buddies and do the league or the team with his, friends, saying no to that is way easier said than done.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It definitely is. And it's interesting to think about all three because, like you said, healthcare is mandatory. So that's something that is not going away. That's going to be there. You would think that the daycare costs as the child got older would probably start to get smaller. So you could sort of be thinking about that as okay, as the child gets older, that expense goes down and then the extracurricular as the daycare is going down, the extracurricular potentially is maybe going up. But at the same time, the extracurricular, like you're saying, is more of a choice. It is a choice. It's not something that's mandatory like healthcare. So it's all kind of interesting just to think about because there could be some variances depending on like how old they are and that type of thing. Some of that could potentially change and maybe even out a little bit more than we're thinking.
And
So
and as time passes, our careers progress as well. And we get opportunities to maybe get more flexibility or to be earning more money. And so that's going to play into it as well. So again, a lot of things to think about here. We don't need to figure out, there's no way for us to figure out what we're going to do in 5 years. Hopefully we put down something that's fair enough, and then you two can just figure it out as you go on and life changes.
yeah. Are there any topics or any that are kind of pitfalls that maybe people assume or maybe don't think about or should consider, when you're talking about these add-ons?
I think there's two things to think about that stick out in my mind. One is the reimbursement mechanics. So, how does that work? If I have a bill for a medical expense, how am I delivering it? Is there a time obligation for me to deliver it? If I have a bill and I'm not organized and like a year later I go, oh, I'm owed $500 for this thing and I send it to the other side, that doesn't feel very fair. So there's usually should be some sort of deadline for you to get those bills to the other side. and then a deadline for them to reimburse you. So like getting clear on the mechanics of how each side is reimbursed is one. And then the other one is, we do, as much as I like the idea of putting the agreement in the drawer and then you two just working together on figuring things out, if there is a substantial change in circumstances, you do need to be careful of not modifying it. If you don't modify it, you say, I'm just going to work this out with the other side. Well, if things go south, then you don't have a backstop and you can't go to the court and say, well, we've had this other agreement for the last 3 years, so I shouldn't owe this money they're saying I owe. The court is most likely going to say, well, is it a court order? Did you sign something? Did you bring it to court and have me sign it? The answer is no. That can be really tricky to defend against. So if there is some sort of substantial change that's going to affect things like that, I would seriously consider, and this is something that I think can be done without a lawyer in many circumstances, or paying a lawyer, not a full $5,000 retainer, but potentially less if you have an agreement, is get that agreement signed by the other side, get it into court and get a judge to sign it. At least then you have some insurance should things go south in the future.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Bobby. Before we go, why don't we do a couple of like hypotheticals? You down for that? Okay. So the couple has 50-50, and do they still split hockey and braces? Is that kind of the blanket that if you're 50-50, you're splitting those expenses?
Yeah. So let's break this down in a couple different ways. So if they have 50-50 time, they don't necessarily have 50-50 support, if you will. As we learned on last episode, you still could be paying some support, even if you have 50-50 time, although it's going to be drastically less. And then the second issue is, well, how are we going to split the hockey and the braces? Most likely those things are going to be more based on income than they are overnights. So if there's one side that's making $12,000 a month, the other side's making $5,000, we can expect in this sort of scenario, I wouldn't be surprised if the person making $12,000 is paying maybe 2/3 of those expenses. But again, this comes down to, what did you negotiate during your divorce? This is all up for negotiation. We want to keep this stuff out of the hands of the judge. That's how you get a divorce done quickly, is that you do enter into a good negotiation and work these numbers out.
Okay, so another scenario. I lost my job. Daycare went to 0. Now what?
So if you lost your job and, they're saying daycare went to 0, does that mean that you now don't have to pay daycare because you're caring for the child because you lost your job? Let's assume that's what the hypothetical meant, unless you're reading it a different way, Greer.
That's how I'm reading it too.
Okay. So I'm trying to think through this scenario. One, I'll just say, I don't think it's very realistic.
I don't either, because aren't they going to have to get a job to make money?
They're gonna have to get a job to make money. It doesn't make sense to just pull a kid out of daycare. Just be like, oh, I lost my job. Okay, end daycare. Like, getting into daycare can be difficult.
Sure.
So you don't want to just pull your kid out of it. But I'll indulge you and I'll say that, let's say in this scenario, it does make sense to pull them out of daycare. In that situation, yeah, you're going to have to come up with a new agreement with your ex-spouse. That agreement needs to be signed, and you need to get it to the judge and get it signed by the judge. Otherwise, you're going to be in the situation where your child support obligations and what's on paper in your child care obligations is wildly different than what you're doing in reality. And that is just a recipe for disaster and problems in the future, as far as, the one side saying, well, you owe me all this money because this is what the court order said. And then you're saying, no, I don't. We took him out of daycare. It doesn't make sense for me to be paying. And let's avoid all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Last one. What happens if my ex stops paying the kids' insurance?
This is one of the rare ones where a financial issue could be deemed an emergency. Rarely do judges say financial issues are emergencies, but if one side stops insurance, it's not uncommon to go into court on an emergency basis and say they pulled the kids off of insurance, because God forbid something happens and the kids aren't covered under insurance. That's a big problem, not just from hospitals changing what they might do as far as treatment goes, but bills being much higher. It's a pretty big deal. It's a very big deal if someone comes off insurance. So if that happens, I'd be consulting with an attorney immediately. I would be looking into how can I get these children on my own insurance temporarily while I resolve this in court. Definitely don't sleep on that one.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bobby, thanks so much for all of your insight and advice today, talking through this calculator about add-ons. Hopefully at home we answered a lot of your questions. If you still have questions, though, please feel free to reach out and we will do a Q&A to try to answer any questions that weren't covered, or if anything was confusing, let us know. Now, Bobby, tell us, there's a couple additional things we can do with the calculator, and I think we're going to discuss that maybe next time. So what will we be covering there?
Yeah, I think next time we're going to fill in the gaps here. We're going to talk about how maintenance might affect your child support amount, how having children outside of the marriage, previous to the marriage, might affect your child support amount. And then I think that's it. We didn't address today specifically private school tuition, so we can touch on that a little bit more on the next.
Is college one you talk about too?
Yes, absolutely. College contribution. That's probably going to be an episode in and of itself. It's just kind of outside the world of child support, but it's 100% one that we'll cover in the not too distant future.
Oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about, Bobby.
Fun never stops.
It never stops. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. Like we said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and keep coming back every week, because we have more and more topics to discuss right here on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.